You're gonna love this lecture. Just a reminder that this is really your course lecture and you have to take good notes on it. You must write down a one-sentence summary. So you record the slide number first and then you write the theme of each slide in one sentence using your own words, and you'll get to show them to me later to impress me. Let's go. A low-income woman is more likely to become a prostitute. That's the overarching theme for today's lesson, and we're going to analyze it through our four guiding questions. So the incentives, the top-down paternalistic response, the unintended consequences, and a bottom-up alternative. So record the slide number and write your answer. Even though you may not be sure, it's okay. Write your answer to these four questions in your notes, and we're going to come back to them later. Here's a powerful tool for understanding how the world works and making predictions. When we say demand, we mean buyers or consumers, and supply means sellers or producers. We can use these interchangeably. Demand is how much the buyers value a product given these three things, which are three important factors. Demand is the same as their willingness to pay, which is the maximum price one would pay for something. I underline it because it's quite an important concept. And the gist of supply is the cost that it makes to make a product, which depends on labor as an input and technology. So in the sex market, contraception would be a form of technology, as we're going to see. This is a short slide and yet quite important, so write down the important concepts in it and record this slide number first. What do you think would happen if something becomes more expensive? What would the buyers do? Now, before we make any prediction, we must add an important condition, ceteris paribus. We must isolate for one cause at a time, always, for any prediction. So that's important. Now, the answer here should be quite intuitive, but can you explain why? Why is it that there will be fewer buyers, that a lower quantity is going to be demanded by the buyers? So here's a tip. Look at your notes from the last slide on the factors of demand. Formulate your own rationale and write it down in your notes. So pause here and write down your own answer to the why. So we could say that it won't be affordable to some buyers and some will switch to another alternative. That's called the law of demand, which is when the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. This arrow here shows causality, right? So it shows sequence, and we're going to see this a lot in the course. Now, what about the suppliers? What is their incentive? If the market price is higher, it's good for them. It attracts more sellers. Now you might be like, hang on, why is that? Well, because they're going to earn more profit and they can cover their expenses. So that's called the law of supply. When the price goes up, the quantity supplied also goes up. So demand and supply are about the relationship between price and quantity for demanders and suppliers. Now, can you guess what's going to be the slope of the demand curve? Would it be upward or downward? And what correlation does it show between price and quantity, positive or negative? So write this in your notes and fill in the blanks for yourself. Try to guess what it is. And then do the same thing for supply. What kind of slope does the supply curve have? What kind of a correlation does it show? And then draw a graph of demand and supply diagram with price and quantity on the two axes. They don't have to be curvy. You can do them straight lines. The important thing is the slope and the correlation. So take your time. Make sure you take good notes, fill in the blanks, and do a nice diagram for yourself. Wow, that was cool. Now, what's the benefit of sex? You could say sexual gratification. And what about its costs? You could say STIs, pregnancy, and stigma. Babies could be both a cost or benefit depending on whether they're wanted or not. But most people have a lot more sex than the babies they want. So generally, pregnancy is considered a cost. And these vary based on the type of sex, as you can see. So for instance, STIs like AIDS are higher among homosexual men. And all of these are probabilistic. So we must use the expected value formula to make predictions and make sense of the trends. Now, what happens when there's better birth control and more access to abortion, other things being equal? What's your prediction? Both of them have the same impact. They reduce the expected cost of sex. Now remember the law of demand. What happens when something becomes more affordable and cheaper? Well, people are gonna do more of it. So in this case, people are going to have more sex of all type, just across the board. And you name it. Oh, I hate that picture. Geez. And this is exactly what happened in the 20th century. And with that, social norms are modified so that there is less stigma since sex isn't so costly anymore. And all that results in more births out of wedlock. So we're going to see more of this later, but just to give you a little glimpse of examples here. This is an important slide. Watch it carefully and I'll give you notes later. We want to see how a market works, the dynamics of market forces, and we'll look at the sex market, like Trevon in the red light district of Amsterdam, Nevada, and many developing countries. Now, a couple of observations firsthand. One of them is that there is a huge imbalance in the sex market. There are some male sex workers, but most of the sellers are women, and the buyers are almost all men. It's really sick. And if you want to see the reality of the sex trade, it's not in the West, but in the poor countries of Asia and Africa. It's really tragic. And if you look into the eyes of that girl, you'll no longer be able to see her like an object. Okay, we're going to talk about the price of sex and the interaction of its buyers and sellers. Let's say the price of one session is $400, which is relatively expensive. Now, based on the law of demand, how many buyers do you expect there to be if something is too expensive? Very few people would be willing to buy. What about the sellers? How many prostitutes would be willing to offer their service at this price? Probably more. So we can predict that just based on the laws of demand and supply. There will be few buyers and many sellers. Now, can the two buyers here get the sex that they want? Sure, there's plenty of supply. What about the prostitutes? Can they sell as much as they want? No, because there's not enough demand at this price. So some of the sellers will be frustrated. They will be unhappy. Now, if they want to sell and make money, what should they do? They will compete among each other for the few buyers by lowering the price to attract more buyers. Now, what does the law of demand tell us when the price goes down? More people can afford it, right? So what's going to happen is that the number of buyers will increase. And what does the law of supply say if the price goes down? Some of the prostitutes will not be happy and they're going to be like, screw you guys, I'm out of here. So we're going to end up with 4 of each. This is how the market forces bring buyers and sellers to an agreement. Now suppose the market price is really low, like $10. Again, think of the law of demand and the law of supply. There will be many buyers, but just one seller in this case. So the buyers will be a lot compared to the sellers, which means that some of the buyers will not be able to get what they want. So they're going to be unhappy in a situation where the price is too low. Now suppose one of them, let's say this dude is really horny and just want to do it. So what should they do? They'll go up to the prostitute and say, hey baby, come with me, I'll pay you more. So the buyers will compete among each other by bidding a higher price. And as the price goes up, it discourages the buyers and attracts the sellers. And what happens is that some of these buyers will leave the market because of the law of demand, and more sellers will be attracted to the market because of the law of supply. And it's going to have a happy ending. By the way, these prices are based on Amsterdam. The average price is about $25 in India and $40 in Thailand. See how you can use the law of supply and the law of demand to make predictions? It's really powerful and very neat. So what I would say is draw a table with 3 columns on one side of the page for yourself and keep the other side blank for the notes that I'm going to give you. And also draw some pictures at the bottom of the page for retention. But don't get too graphic with it. Oh no. Time to take notes. So this is what you should already have, and we're going to divide it into 3 segments. When the price is high, there's going to be few buyers and many sellers. That's called a surplus, which is excess quantity supplied. So this thing, quantity supplied being higher, is quantity supplied here, which is a surplus. And the sellers are going to fight over the limited buyers. This fight is not violent, so it doesn't have a negative connotation. The technical term for it is competition, which is super important in economics. It's a key to getting back to equilibrium. And the prices are going to go down whenever there is fight among the sellers. If the price is low, there's going to be many buyers and few sellers, and that's called a shortage. So that's excess quantity demanded. So this quantity demanded is the same as here. And in this case, the buyers are going to fight over the limited supply. So that's a competition among buyers. And the result of that is upward pressure on the price. So these are the dynamics of how the prices respond to either having too many buyers or too many sellers relative to the other side. And the middle side is when they're equal, which is called equilibrium. Duh. And that's a situation of price stability. So pause here, record the slide number, write a one-sentence summary for yourself, and take good notes on the lesson so far. Let's recap. What's a market? That's where buyers and sellers meet, but not a physical location. It's a system, it's a mechanism, it's a process. It's the interaction of buyers and sellers to exchange a good or service. So you could say that a market means demand and supply put together. And there is a market for literally everything. There's a market for education, for security, even for love, where the two partners are both buyers and sellers. It doesn't need to have a monetary transfer as long as some resources are spent, as long as there is a sacrifice, that is the price. And we are talking about free markets. But what does that mean? Where everything is free? Good luck with that. What it means is freedom of entry for new providers, and that is the key to competition, which means that there should be no license requirements, because these license requirements prevent newcomers. The buyers and sellers are free to exchange as rational agents, and the price is free to respond to an imbalance, and it's free from government imposing a price or quantity. Prices are not determined by a central authority. If these conditions are met, then a free market always converges to equilibrium. Because if you're not at equilibrium, then competition among either buyers or sellers will lead us back to equilibrium, where we are making the most of our resources. So that's maximum efficiency, and that's also called the invisible hand, where self-interested buyers and sellers interact in such a way that maximizes everyone's well-being. So that was a theory by Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. And so let's pay tribute to him. Wow, that was cool. So let's do some fun stuff. We're going to do a graph of any generic market. In economics, we always place price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. And the demand curve slopes downward and the supply curve slopes upward because of the correlation that they have, right? Now, you could do it curvy or straight line, doesn't matter. When we say a demand curve, it doesn't mean that it should be curvy, it could be a straight line. Linear is also fine. The point in the middle is the equilibrium, so we call that E, and it corresponds to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And we always write the name of the market on the top. So in this case, we call it the sex market, which means that here we have the price of sex, we have the supply of sex, the demand for sex, and the quantity of sex. Everything is for that given product. And this, if you draw the market for anything else, it's going to have the same shape. The market for housing, the market for drugs, you name it. Now, let's get rid of this thing to have some more space. If the price is above the equilibrium price, then it's more than its value to the consumers, right? Which means it's inefficient. And that is going to result in a surplus because there are not enough buyers to buy. If the price is below its equilibrium price, then it means it doesn't cover the cost of production, which again means inefficiency. And that is a situation of shortage. So this model was first developed by Alfred Marshall, so the credit goes to him. So do a nice, large, neat diagram for yourself. Use a ruler and make sure you have all of the labels for yourself. A very special and important market is the labor market. Now think about what is being exchanged in the labor market. The product is the time and energy of the workers. Notice that, by the way, I'm putting L here just to distinguish, just to be clarified that we're talking about labor here. And who are the suppliers of the labor? Or the suppliers would be the households or the workers. They are the ones who are selling. And who are the demanders? The demanders would be the firms and employers. Right? So the only little difference is that with other products, the firms are the sellers and the household are the buyers. In the labor market, it's the other way around, but the logic is exactly the same. And the wage rate would be the price of labor. So instead of P, we can put W, and we can have the equilibrium with the corresponding quantity and wage rate. Exactly the same dynamics follow. And then unemployment is when many people are willing to offer work, but few firms are willing to hire. Now, what is it called when you have a high level of supply, but a low level of firms who are willing to hire. That would be a surplus. Oh, that's so cool. So unemployment is exactly the same as a surplus of labor. By the way, you can think of prostitutes and porn stars as a form of labor market in the sense that they're hired by brothels. So that's one application of it. So pause here, draw a labor market for yourself with proper labeling and summarize this slide in one sentence. Start with this slide number. Did you see that? It was crushed. In the sex market, the sellers are the prostitutes, the escorts, and a seller's behavior is determined by their costs. And cost here isn't just money, but opportunity cost, any other option that they have to sacrifice. Now, in all these cases, one doesn't have much to lose by turning to prostitution. In Thailand, for instance, the average wage of women is relatively low, and there are many foreign clients with a high income and a high willingness to pay. So those women make a rational decision according to their expected benefits and expected costs. These two last items are more related to historical elements and evolution, where there was an either-or relationship between prostitution and marriage, and virginity was a major asset for marriage. That's why prostitutes have historically been women who had less of these options and assets. If you think of unsafe sex, that would be an additional cost in terms of risk for the sex workers. So it's natural that there is a premium for it. That's called the compensating differential. It compensates them for the extra risk that they take. But this is only in the heterosexual market. For male sex workers, there is a premium for safe sex and a penalty for condomless sex. Now you might be like, hang on, why should it be different? Well, it shouldn't, but it so happens that there is an abundance, a surplus of safe sex in the heterosexual market and a shortage of unprotected sex. So clients would have to pay more for unsafe sex since it's rare. But it so happens that gay men can find condomless sex quite easily outside the market while there is a shortage of safe male sex. Not to mention the high risk of STIs. What a mess. So there's really no contradiction because both are following the market mechanism. By the way, we are all prostitutes in one way or another. We're constantly putting ourselves on display and selling some aspect of ourselves. There is no fundamental difference between sex workers and other workers. Oh no, what have we done? Top-down and bottom-up are 2 points of view, 2 ways of understanding how human society functions with implications about how they should be treated. The gist of the top-down approach or mentality is that a goal cannot be achieved unless it is explicitly laid out and enacted. The bottom-up mindset is that no, substantial developments have a more implicit and natural growth. One favors government intervention to solve social problems, the other relies on the market forces. One is optimistic about the power of a centralized authority to sort things out, the other is optimistic about people's ability to resolve their problems. In one model, humans are seen as unreliable children. In the other, they're treated as responsible and autonomous adults. One responds more to immediate symptoms, the other emphasizes gradual processes. So that should give you an idea of what all this mess is about. Now, governments in general have a top-down approach because that's the nature of the government. Economic thinking is more bottom-up, again, because that's the nature of the discipline. And you may take any position that you like, that you find more compelling. But I want you to learn both ways of thinking and their implications. There are many great thinkers on both sides. You don't have to see them as right and wrong, but you can see them in terms of priority and emphasis, which means there's a trade-off. Neither is an ideal model. As Thomas Sowell said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. But guess what? We must choose one. When we make sense of human behavior and interact with each other, we necessarily have some underlying assumptions and guiding principles. I want you to be more conscious of where you stand. So pause here and try to summarize these 2 ways of thinking using your own words. Here are some examples of the top-down mentality. The army is a very good example, very top-down. Family is another one. And the mainstream religious worldview is also like that. There is a God out there who rules over the world like an authoritarian monarch. A very bottom-up process is language. No one decides the meaning and grammar of language, but the languages evolve as people interact with each other. There have been some artificially designed languages like Esperanto, but the project didn't fly. And this is quite meaningful. It's not a coincidence. Substantial change must grow organically, voluntarily, spontaneously. It cannot be forced. Natural selection is another excellent example, and it opened our eyes that not everything has to be deliberately designed and implemented. The top-down solution to social issues are regulation and legislation. The bottom-up solutions are education and innovation. So think of your own examples for each and write them down. Think of maybe an example from your own life and experience. All right, you made it. So here's a bunch of questions based on today's lesson. Record the slide number and the question number. You don't need to copy down the question text and try to answer them using the concepts and principles that you learned from today's lesson. You can think of these as end of chapter questions in a textbook, which reviews the material. So these are very useful and you're going to have the chance to share them with your classmates. If anything, if you cannot figure out the answer to these things yourself or with your classmates, then raise it in the class so that we go over it together. Let's summarize today's lesson using a concept map. We talked about buyers and sellers. Buyers are governed by the law of demand and sellers follow the law of supply. Notice once again that the arrows show sequence and this is how you read it. So you start with buyers, then you move to the law of demand, and the word here helps you understand what is the relationship between these two concepts. So this is how you do concept maps, and the two laws of demand and supply give us an exchange which is called market. So market is that exchange process, and that is governed by the invisible hand, which leads to the equilibrium, and at equilibrium we get maximum efficiency. So that efficiency is an important thing, and at that point what it means is that there is no shortage and there is no surplus. A shortage is when the buyers are unhappy and a surplus is when the sellers are unhappy. The invisible hand also is based on competition, which follows a bottom-up mentality. The invisible hand means there should be no barriers to entry, and that follows a top-down mentality. So in this lesson, I would emphasize surplus and shortage as well as efficiency. So efficiency is something that economists are obsessed about. So what I would say is that take your own concepts and do your own concept map. It's okay if it's messy. It's okay. It doesn't have to be symmetric and whatever. If you wanna copy mine, make sure you don't just copy. You have to change the wording a bit and rearrange things a bit. All right. So the more you can change it, the more you can internalize it, and the more you can succeed in your learning. Take a couple of minutes to re-answer our guiding questions for today's lesson in the light of what you learned. And you might want to refer to the video to make sure that you're using some of the concepts there. So record the slide number and re-answer these questions. When you come to see me there, they should show some progress. I'm going to show you a sample student answer, but first I want you to give it another shot. So a relatively advanced answer for this could be that the incentives are that she has fewer options elsewhere and that her expected benefit exceeds her expected cost. For top-down solutions could be criminalizing prostitution or assisting her with welfare payments. Unintended consequences could be that there's going to be a black market there, or there might be fewer sex workers, so less competition and therefore more risky sex. An alternative could be decriminalizing prostitution, which leads to greater transparency, and removing barriers to marriage and female education, which tend to be the substitutes. So this should give you an idea of the level of thinking that is expected from you. And thank you for your patience and have a great day.